What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Mostly Focused. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan McQuarter, and my beautiful co-host, JP Payton, Zach Griffin, and I can't reach him, but Garrett Hunt, who just let out a gnarly burp.
Yeah, brother.
I don't have any Hulk Hogan for you to do tonight, so.
God, that felt like forever ago.
It really did.
Was.
He walked in here and he's like, bro, you got a beard now. I was like, I've seen you more recently since
It stuck around longer than I expected.
Yeah.
Listen, you didn't tell me how much care goes into having to maintain a beard. Like, I'm having to trim this down here like daily. And then I have to go trim this mustache from getting down into my lips every day.
I think it gets easier as it gets a little bit longer, though.
Yeah, and I can't get it to quite fill in how I need it right here. It's better than it's been, but this isn't mostly beards, but
Get a boar's hairbrush and some good oil and brush.
well, I better get it for RFK bans it. Can't have him banning my beard oil.
Just scan it with your Yucca app and see if it has
Yucca will tell me
hazardous ingredients
I've heard
or not.
people, this isn't my original. People call Yucca yucca because it hates everything you put in there.
It does.
I know.
The gum that I have in my pocket, 0 out of 100.
On the go pouches for kids. They give it like 90% green.
Oh, wow.
They love the little pouches Violet drinks, and she wears those things out. So, speaking of, my daughter now sleeps in a big girl bed. So there's a 50-50 chance if we get too loud, she's just going to open that door and come meander out here and tell us to be quiet. So
hopefully she doesn't trip over all the cables and cords that are over there.
Yeah, and knocks the phone over.
Yeah,
she's actually shockingly pretty,
Prindy.
Light on her feet. So until she just throws herself down, which you've witnessed her do that. Her knees are like shins.
Yeah.
Up still or something. Anyway, what have y'all been up to? It's been a month or so since we've recorded last. So a little over a month. JP, you go ahead. You got the newest child on the block.
Getting less and less sleep. 3-month regression and all that stuff has been.
So June's
great.
3 months old now?
June is 3.5.
3.5?
Yeah, 3.5 months. She's great. She's amazing. So.
She's great. She just doesn't sleep.
She sleeps during the day. She does great. And she sleeps at night. It's just like waking up every 15 to 30 minutes.
So she's a yellow card girly. Sleeping all day, staying up all night.
No. We're gonna work on that.
Bump, bump, bump. Anyway, Zach, what about you?
Not too much. Just Ella's in school. I'm working. Alexa's working. Getting ready for holidays. All of our families live here.
Yeah, which is nice.
So
Don't have to travel.
Yeah, but since we're the young couple that doesn't host, we do travel. We just drive all over God's good creation here.
Our Thanksgiving started tonight. We had our first Thanksgiving for the year.
You got out of it?
No, I went to it.
Oh.
Yeah, but
that's why you can't go to Under Oath Friday either.
But like Thanksgiving Day, JP and I are running 5K, I assume.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Then I have a breakfast Thanksgiving, a lunch Thanksgiving, and a dinner Thanksgiving.
This year, me and Abby made a decision not to do that specifically on Christmas. We normally had like 5 Christmases. This year, we're not rushing anywhere. We're doing Christmas Eve at my in-laws. We're doing a morning, just no rush, just here with me and Abby and Violet. And then we're going to my parents that night. And then if anybody else, my grandparents want to do their Christmas that night, tough.
Our Christmas.
Send me your gifts later.
Christmas Day, we don't go anywhere. We stay home.
You're going to go see Nosferatu?
No.
It opens
not
Christmas
Day. But we wake up, Ella opens her presents. We have 2 traditions. We go eat at Waffle House.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that.
And then we spend the day, let Ella play. If people want to see us, they come over. And then
I feel like that's almost like a threat to come see you.
At night, we get Chinese food from Number One.
Number One.
The best.
I wonder, it's smart marketing not to call themselves Number 2, even though that would be more aptly named. Number 2 buffet. Garrett, what about you?
Not a whole lot. School with the kids, and Leo's in basketball right now. And
is any good?
Yeah, he's athletic. He's got good genes.
Everybody looked down at me like, how's he going to answer this?
Yeah, no, he's good.
How's Call of Duty treating you? Black Ops 6 has come out, and I had pneumonia 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And there was never technically a better time to be sick. Because Black Ops 6 opened that weekend.
Yeah.
So while I would rather not have had pneumonia, at least I could play a little bit of Call of Duty.
Yeah, it all worked out.
It did. God's plan.
Yeah. Hashtag.
COD's plan.
COD's plan. That's right. Me and Zach are constantly in a back and forth battle for top of the leaderboards and headshots and camos. And then Garrett's over here I'm talking.
He's just
Garrett
vibing.
used to be one of the best Call of Duty players I'd ever seen.
I'm just struggle busting, man.
He is just mega.
Prison changed you, man.
Yeah, it did.
It did.
It did.
You know,
You're mega mid now. You're just.
I am. Listen, let me be third on the leaderboard, fourth on the leaderboard.
You're like
With,
eighth on the leaderboard right now.
Yeah,
out of 9.
JP doesn't have the game and he's above you.
he is. I can't do
That's
it. I
definitely
can't do
not
it
true.
anymore.
X is 1 above you.
Hey, what time is that?
Zach and JP have no
I have
context.
no idea who that is.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, listen. So tonight we're talking about purity culture. I don't have a title for it yet, so we'll get there. So you'll know what it is on the top of it by JP's nice little graphic. This is something that we've been talking about doing for a long time. All us 3 grew up in youth group, very entrenched in it. Garrett was in the streets doing meth. Actually, not in high school. You weren't. You were just
Some of these strays.
yeah, catching them. But Garrett's now a youth pastor and now leading. He's full. Garrett's making it worse right now. Did you show Zach at least? No, just slide the laptop over or zoom in.
I closed the tab. I can't. You gotta.
Anyway,
I never get to see Garrett get shook up.
well, the picture he pulled up couldn't have been better. I saw it, but also knew what I was looking for. So, anyway, we're talking about purity culture, and Garrett being the youth pastor, we're going to pin a lot of this back onto him because while he didn't grow
It's
up,
his fault.
yes, while he didn't grow up in purity culture in the youth group and stuff like that, which he came to our youth group some in high school.
Yeah, but he was that kid.
Yeah, he just was the friend that
I
came
was a kid.
for the
They were like
trips.
need to evangelize to real bad.
So
No, we
let's
took
not
you
play
to go see
dodgeball.
Family Force 5 and
Yeah,
1,000 Foot Crutch, all that kind of stuff.
radiator baby.
Yeah, Radiator. Dude, it's still wild to me that Lecrae opened for Family Force 5
Yeah,
that night.
yeah.
Wow.
It feels like there was only like 75 of us in that
I know.
church in
It was
there.
a great time.
Here's a
Yeah.
hot take. I have never been a Family Force 5 fan.
Oh, that first album with Country Gentleman, Love Addict, flawless.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one with Radiator's pretty good too. Then after that, no, they fell off after Soul Glow left. That's a
Yeah.
topic for another day. So we're gonna jump in talking about purity culture, kind of like the pros and the cons of it, what purity culture is to us, and explaining that, the positive, if there are any effects of it, and then the negative, how that's translated to us as adults, what we would change, what we've picked up and carried on with us, good or bad. Is that it in a nutshell? I pin it to you because the way we do these notes is I come up with the topics and then I put like 8 bullet points in there, and then JP goes and just actually makes them eligible.
Yeah, and I like to be
Or
prepared.
eligible,
And
intelligible.
I can't
legible.
be prepared.
Yes.
Yeah, Jonathan's like Pepe
Edible.
Silva. Like everything's pinned on the board, the threads connected, and I'm just like deciphering it.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Speaking
So-
of which, yesterday I was in the shower and I texted JP and I was like, "Hey,
I didn't know that.
you didn't know the shower context."
Didn't know that.
The shower. I was like, "Hey, I think I'm going to go see Heretic tonight at 7:55. You want to go?" Like I said, I got to get permission first. And then about 2 seconds later, I was like, "Never mind. Nora's playing at 4 at Maiden Alley. Not sure I can pull it off. I'm going to try." He said,
Book it.
"Same." We pulled it off. We went and saw Nora last night. Right on purity culture. I cannot recommend it for Christians.
No, I cannot recommend it.
Absolutely not. Great movie.
But yeah, it's really
Great
good.
film. In terms of objectively making a film, great film.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
Alexa was homesick today, and she started watching
She lives
Handmaid's
here.
Handmaid's
What do you
Tale.
mean she was homesick?
She started watching Handmaid's Tale after having read the books recently.
Yeah.
She was like, "This was great segue into y'all's conversation."
Yeah, it is. It's the
Yeah.
women's suffrage, man. And how did we not bring this up? We've had a whole election since then.
It's worth glossing over.
Donald Trump is now our president and
President-elect.
and the cabinet is a constant daily source of entertainment for me.
I mean, most are out of entertainment. So yeah, it's
Golly, I between that and Kentucky basketball news, which Kentucky beat Duke, moved to number 9 in the polls. These are important things.
Pope is hope.
Hope is hope. Hope is hope. Anyway, those two things happen.
That's
So,
life.
all right. So let's jump into purity culture. Let's get to talking about it. So Garrett, I want to pin it to you. Let's start with you here as the newbie on the block. You didn't grow up in church, really, right?
Right.
Yeah, definitely not.
I
And
mean,
we
I was
established
like-
this previously. but specifically you weren't entrenched in like a set youth group with like a head youth pastor.
No, and I was talking to the pastor that was the pastor of the church that I used to go to in the youth, and I was like, I don't really remember ever being like taught the Bible. He's like, man, that makes me feel bad. I'm like, not on you. You had a youth pastor or something, but I don't necessarily remember any of that stuff. But mainly youth group was to go and play basketball and hang out with
Go to shows, go to trips, go on trips.
Yeah.
So talking about purity culture for someone who wasn't like well-versed, like in it, what does purity culture mean to you? What is your understanding of purity culture?
Well,
like just the word purity culture, like does that have any connotation to you before we started talking about this as a topic? Or
I mean, not really. When I think of the term purity culture and stuff, I just think of something that's pure, and trying to keep it clean.
Love that.
So
that's some sage interpretation right there.
That's
when I think of purity culture, I think of purity. I think of things being pure.
Chat, clip that. And then,
All right. So thank you for that. I love you.
This is a learning experience.
Zach, for you, what is your understanding of purity culture? Just like what does it mean to you as someone who was in it?
Well, I mean, us being millennials, we really kind of just caught the tail end.
Mm-hmm.
It was really big in like the 80s and like early 90s was the big push.
Yeah.
But as far as like just defining it, purity culture is just the reaction to the free love movement in the 60s and 70s. You had this big like sexual awakening happen. And rather than...
Have I told you all the story about mine?
Your sexual awakening?
Just kidding.
And all you...
I was talking about the pre-pod discussion.
Okay. And the American... I don't want to say this is a uniquely American thing, but it is a uniquely Western
Absolutely.
thing. And so rather than, approach the sexual awakening with, grace and love and stuff, we saw I'm just going to say American church, Western church overreact and be like, we have to essentially undo what's happening. And so you had this like real big push toward like, and the push I think is genuine, and we'll probably get into this. I don't want to skip too far ahead.
You're skipping pretty far ahead.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's it. That's all it is. And it was just a push toward like being set apart.
Fair. Did you? Well, I'll ask the same question. What was or maybe this is a better way to answer this because this is.
I just defined it. I don't know if that's what you wanted or not.
I never heard the word purity culture while I was in youth group. I don't think. I don't think that was something I heard.
Us charismatics probably heard it a little bit different. I always had this understanding of like a Nazarite vow. Like I'm setting myself
I don't think I've ever heard of the Nazarite vow.
Yeah,
oh, you never heard? You heard of that?
Yes.
You heard of that? So like purity culture to me, it wasn't like this. I mean, it was a way of life, but it wasn't as like meant to be culturally. I didn't associate purity culture with like conservative, like being conservative, which is I think what a majority of society has experienced it as. Purity culture for me had been something that was more like the same way someone would fast a meal or something. Like it was like a sacrifice, meant to be a sacrifice, and so the Nazarite vow was like this group of people that were set apart. They would not cut their hair. Like it was all this,
Dang, that was in y'all's youth group?
I mean, it was like extremely coded. Yeah, like going to the ramp.
Well, yeah,
I never heard of Nazarite vow until I came to Faith Center.
I've still never heard of it, and I still don't know if I understand it. I
specifically remember places and people filling out like chastity pledges.
That I remember.
And that was the invention of the purity rings.
I feel like
that's
those things.
Purity rings and promise rings. Those are like the two big things.
Are just symbols of what JP's talking about.
So again, talking from my own personal experience, I didn't have like a one-on-one, I would say, experience with that type of purity culture. I just had a more like over commitment to like a quote unquote holy way of life. And
Yeah.
we can talk about that later. But yeah, we didn't. There wasn't anything as far as like chastity talked about. There wasn't anything talked about for sex or anything like that. There was. I didn't have those types of conversations. And I didn't have a youth group growing up.
I felt like it was in terms of being exposed to the term purity culture or whatever. I don't feel like for you, it wasn't like purity culture, the word to me. It was like what you just said, purity rings, promise rings, chastity pledges, abstinence was talked about a lot. But for me, it was just more of the emphasis on, sex bad.
Yeah.
Jesus better, that kind
we
of
also have to realize that purity culture is a hindsight naming of a
movement.
It's kind of like, in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't called the sexual revolution while you were in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like looking back, that's what it's been.
It was just
named.
called Saturday.
Well, and you saw it
So
more prevalent in like media too. Like there was such a push to almost.
The VeggieTales had no genitalia. That's all you need to know.
But worth never.
Thank God.
I was waiting.
Pure.
What?
Pure.
What a sage. What a
like an autistic kid over here, just pure.
Pure.
Okay.
Anyway. All right. So
Clip it.
So we can all agree then, the most of us, like we were in youth group attending age whenever we first heard about
and we were at that also transitional age of like kids in youth group, because we were just getting exposed to internet tangibly, phones, things were getting hypersexualized more because you had more access to TV. So we were
MySpace,
Zanga before MySpace. Zanga actually taught me how to code, and you forget all about that. But yeah, Zanga, MySpace, MSN Messenger, that's where all the real drama happened.
I didn't have any of those.
What?
Nope.
That's wild. That's crazy. But anyway, porn was starting to get, getting exposed to all that. We were that bridge generation. So it made this whole purity culture thing probably more of a headache for youth pastors then, because they didn't know how to, they're boomers. They don't know how to deal with all this. And they overreacted.
Yeah.
And, part of this, we'll talk about this later, is I want to talk about the hearts of the people who did it, because I think that's worth examining and what their intentions were with it. I have a preconceived notion that most of them meant well, but we'll see what we all feel like. So, JP, I'll start with you, because you were just talking about what were some of the rules of purity culture from your experience that would kind of help paint a better picture of what it all entailed.
I mean, my understanding of it growing up was, ideas of like lusting
meaning
lusting as in like sexual desires for a girl.
Okay.
Pornography, masturbation, in some aspects, like I never like couldn't not date, but it's not like you pursued it.
So I had a rhyme nursery in my head. Don't diddle the little fiddle lest you see the spittle.
Okay. That just came to you?
Yeah. Talking about masturbation.
Okay.
So,
that was my understanding.
Yeah.
That was my understanding of it.
Zach, what about you?
I mean, it's a lot of the same. JP and I've already concluded that we definitely grew up in the same spheres. It was very much like it was a weird like dichotomy happening. Like sex was good and created by God, but don't think about it because that leads you to sin. Like meditate on how good God is, but not this part of God until you're married.
Well, because how do you, and this is where I go back to thinking about the youth pastor. How does a youth pastor, and Garrett, I'll just kick this to you once I finish my thought here. How does a youth pastor handle that even today? Because obviously we don't do child marriages anymore. So they're not getting married at 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. How do you tell people, hey, let's focus on God, but let's just put our head in the sand. Don't think about sex. Like, how do you manage that? Because kids are having sex, kids are exposed to porn even more so than when we were in youth group. Like, how do you handle that kind of thing? I know this is jumping the gun a little bit, but I want to go ahead and ask you why it's here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can learn from where everyone almost went wrong when it comes to purity culture, is that it was more the teens, and from what I was reading, felt more condemned on their thoughts than actually encouraged to, abstain from it for a reason. But what I was reading is that grace was missing from a lot of the leaders and the youth pastors and everything, and senior pastors, where they didn't operate and forgive kids when they messed up, because chances are they're going to mess up, and more prevalent now than ever. I was just looking at some statistics, and Zach made mention of the 60s sexual revolution. And, at that time, 2% of women had 10 or more sexual partners before marriage. Then you fast forward to the 90s, when this was, a big movement, everything, 10% of women had 10 or more sexual partners.
What was the first stat?
2%.
So in 30 years, it went up 8%, which when I say of women, obviously it takes men to have sex with women, to get that statistic. So, just throwing that out there in case someone's like, well, they're not mentioning men's statistics. But then you fast forward to 2010, that went up to 17% of women have had 10 or more sexual partners before they were married. And, as you look at the trend keeps going up, it would be ignorant on my part and other youth leaders' part to think that these kids aren't having sex. And so when they are, you want to come alongside them and, encourage them and speak to them from experience. Like, I know from experience what it's like and how damaging sex outside of a godly marriage is. And I've seen that damage, and my wife has seen that damage as well. And many people have seen that damage. And so
absolutely.
And then to partner with you, I don't have that damage.
Right.
And so I can walk with Garrett, and we can.
Why do you not have that damage?
Because I waited until I was married.
That's all. That's
sorry. And so like we together as a team have a viewpoint that's more conclusive than just taking, like, you can point out like how it affected you, and I can point out how it affected me.
Yeah.
Or didn't affect me.
Yeah, because there are two sides to each coin to that. Yeah. And I'll circle back on my experience and the pros and cons of each, I think. But anyway, so I think specifically harping back on that, talking about the rules. For me, when I think of rules, though, like I know some things we'll talk about probably later too. So if I'm getting too far ahead of myself, JP, ring me in. But when I think of rules, I think of like, what did your youth group do to help suppress things that we're doing with lust? Because talking about purity culture, obviously the main driving point is going to be lust, sexualized kind of things, and things that pertain all around that. So like for me, it's like the bathing suit thing, like one of the first big things that's not exclusive to my youth group. That's just I think still to this day, a youth group issue is how to handle, girls and boys together in a church Christian setting. Like, so growing up, girls had to wear what preferably was like shorts and a t-shirt, if not just full on pantsuit. But
we had a function this summer, a swimming function, where it was we made the girls and the guys wear a shirt, because it wouldn't just be fair to make the girls wear a shirt. Then, they see a guy without a shirt on, they could, you're going to make it fair.
So
I have, if we circle back to it, then great, I'll wait. But I do have something Alexa and I talked about specifically about that topic.
Put it on while we're talking about put it on.
And she gave me her like viewpoint as would have been a teenage woman, teenage girl. And she said, and I get wearing a t-shirt when you're swimming is hard because it's considered self-preservation. But when you think about it in the long run, what does it do to a girl's confidence and body acceptance and the cultivation of a thought process that includes, I have to protect myself against these people in my church who I'm supposed to trust and that I worship with every week? And how much harder would that be to engage in healthy people outside of that group.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. The air condition kicked off and I was like, wait.
And
Violet's going to come and tell us how.
like she's like, we're growing up, she's like, it felt like, our leaders are trying to protect me. But they're trying to protect me by people that are supposed to be safe. Like, why is it on me to cover my body to prevent these boys from doing something?
Right.
And
teach them not to objectify
And I think
me.
that goes back, and I know we will touch on this, so I'm not going to step on the toes of it. Well, I mean, it's the next point, but is like, what did your youth pastors actually do to steward this? How was your youth pastor? Because in all of my experiences, mine was like a husband and wife duo. They did it together. So you had male and the female. That's how most people, I think, do it. But, how did your male youth pastor help? How did your male pastor help steward the boys and teach them how to,
respectfully look on women?
Correct. And handle those, RBs that happen. Like, because it happens, random boners. I mean, how do you, you gotta learn how to coach those and teach them the waistband tuck. And
seriously,
I missed that orientation.
Yeah,
those are important things.
Next Wednesday, we're gonna go over it.
Anyway, those are important things.
Small groups.
You hit the point though that I didn't exactly hit it, but something that I want to add on to that.
I want to add on to that.
Please do. Like, this is just to add on. Just add. Right. Boom.
Strap it on.
I think a lot of times.
What I meant.
I mean, while we're on it, a lot of these rules and stuff that we find ourselves having to abide by as kids weren't necessarily, yes, they were for our benefit, but it was for the benefit of the adults that were in charge of us more than anything, like youth pastors. I don't have an issue if I go to a swim party, I have to wear a t-shirt. I think it's totally fair that guys have to wear them too. Like, at the end of the day, if you explain the situation, it's understandable. It's fine. But when I come back to with that topic is, in the past, you have girls having to wear them because you have mothers of boys who, otherwise want to look out for their son. And a lot of times it comes down to how are parents raising and stewarding their children. And they have this expectation for how other leadership and how other people should live their lives to otherwise protect their kid.
And I'll say though that I never once went to a swim party in which boys and girls could wear what they desired, like without a t-shirt.
Boys had to wear stuff?
No, I've never been. As a youth, I never went to a swim party where boys didn't have to wear a shirt and girls could wear like a modest swimsuit without a t-shirt on. And never once was it explained to me what JP just said.
Yeah.
It was just a rule.
Yeah.
And I feel like I could have understood.
Yeah, me too.
That's where I, listening to what Alexa was saying, that's where I feel like the leadership went wrong. Like when we
in the past with purity culture.
When we had our swim party, what we did is we explained it, and we had a woman explain it to the women why you should wear stuff like this. Because I think of when I was a 13, 14-year-old boy, we're not idiots.
That's where that like,
and the same thing with the girls, they're the same way. They're just not as vocal about it at that age.
They don't care. I mean, they do, but they don't care as much as the guys.
Yeah.
It's just part of it.
We had to make sure, because setting a rule without an explanation of the rule sets up for stuff for Alexa to have like maybe a poor self body image, like, why do I have to cover up? And like, is something wrong with me?
Yeah.
Or is something wrong with them
Are they dangerous?
Yeah. Are they dangerous?
Yeah. You can't feel safe.
Now you got to question everyone around you. And so you think of like, maybe there should have been an explanation, and maybe there was an explanation, it just wasn't as good as it should have been. Or
looking back on it, whether it be swimsuits or like, one of the worst rules that made me so mad was on church trips in the church van, church bus, or whatever. Because as the preacher's kid, I dated every single girl that came through youth group just to write a passage. And seriously, it was truth. And
shout out Lynn. You're a trooper, man.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that really is
a saint.
Anyway, and we always had to do hand checks periodically in the middle of the night, whatever it may be. Sometimes they wouldn't even let the boys sit by the girls. They like segregate the van.
Yeah. Listen, and they're not allowed to sit. When I'm driving the van, I'm not having guys sit next to girls. And thank God it's not like an old church van like that. Listen, I'm not an idiot.
I just get, but no, for real, I understand though, because I know what happened in the back of those church vans. The church vans, and correct me if I'm wrong, youth group kids, church vans are where a lot of youth group church people's sexual experiences first happen.
Where they first happen.
Church vans, like not trips. I'm not trying to be funny or rude. That's just truth.
Probably.
Who amongst us has not had one to the club?
In a church van? Garrett.
I went to youth group on Wednesdays.
Think about your church.
Oh, so you still made a way?
Do what? We had a church van that would come and pick us up on Wednesday nights every Wednesday.
So you experienced church. This isn't trying to be crude. This is factual science. You experienced church van hijinks and you weren't even in like a set youth group?
Right.
See, that's amazing.
Power of the van.
Power of the van.
It is.
Van's plan.
God's van.
God's van.
Good Lord, not God's van.
Lowercase g.
Satan's
Sex God.
van.
Sex God's van.
Oh.
Anyway, but yeah, to your point, I get it. I understand why those rules need to be there, doubly more now than they even were back then.
Yeah.
But how they're explained, how they're nurtured, how they're taught on. That's the thing. I didn't get a lot of teaching on these things. Not that you don't want to make it a teaching point, but you know, the gist of any time. Because I think the youth pastors thought it was awkward too, and I get it. It was basically like a football coach, PE teacher talking about sex.
Oh yeah.
It was actually the equivalent of youth group talking about sex. It's
and I think,
don't do it. You'll get pregnant, have a baby, and go to hell.
Well,
like,
one thing
I don't
too,
want any of those things.
That's I think is widely accepted now is that like sex was created by God, and I think it's important at a young age, not at a young age, but like an age where you understand intercourse and how multiplication happens. That is created by God, and just because you have those feelings doesn't mean you're like a bad kid or anything like that, you know, and explaining to them the repercussions of those actions. If you are in the back of a church van, you know, going to some trip or whatever, but
Welcome to My Life by Simple Plans playing on your CD Walkman, headphones in, looking up at the stars just right, head on your shoulder, the mood strikes.
I have a question.
Wow. Amazing.
Does anyone remember
Careful.
Does anyone remember like a girl getting a girl getting pregnant in youth group and continuing to come to youth group with a child?
I did not.
I have no
youth
memory of that.
Trying to say
If a
something.
kid got pregnant, it was almost, I'm sure it wasn't said, but it was almost like they weren't allowed back.
So
I'm trying to remember.
my dad's parents were pastors as well. And when they retired, they started coming to my dad's church when I was at the end of my youth group years. And they opened a place called House of Hope in Paducah. And they dealt with a lot of girls in crisis who were already pregnant. And those girls came to youth group. I was on the way out of youth group. I was like 16, 17. But they did come. And at first, especially less through the youth, more the church members, they were more of a pariah. But as we got used to it and accustomed to it, kind of like Lifeline. If you're not used to the Lifeline guys coming, it's like, oh my gosh, who let this riffraff in? Because I remember when they come visit my parents. I'm serious. I mean, I remember when they first visited, who are all these dudes?
Garrett
I used to be part of the vans, man.
Yeah,
We'd pull up
riffraff.
like 4 vans deep, 50 dudes walk out, you know, and we're all like,
That's van.
what's up?
Yeah, so but it's a similar thing with like pregnancy and girls. When you had all these pregnant girls coming to church, it's like,
And they're like, what's up?
whoa, my
I didn't
gosh.
have that.
So I mean, I didn't towards the end, but we did get
We
exposed
screened
to
them before they came into our church. If they were pregnant, they had to leave.
or get. Never mind. I had
I'm
a
just
really
kidding.
dark
I'm just
joke.
kidding.
Really dark joke. I let it go.
That's good.
Anyway, so kind of talking about teaching youth pastors how you handle this kind of stuff. I think it's a good transition. Like in talking about how you felt pressured in youth to be empowered or to give into it. Did any of you, us three, have a good support system from your youth group leaders and your peers? I guess your closest friends in there.
So for me personally, y'all talk about like youth group experience. I did not have like a quote unquote youth group. I went to a church that was too small to really have one. There was a collection of kids. It's more like a life group, small group setting. And there was a ministry, like a youth ministry I was involved in growing up. And that was more or less my youth group.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the more supportive experience I've had as far as like, because these kids were a part of this ministry because there was a level of commitment involved to it. So there's like an expectation, there's accountability there. Not even with just the leadership, not with just the leadership, but even with those that were in the group with us. And so my experience in growing up was relatively good up until like sophomore, junior year when I kind of grew out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, but you know, after that, there was like, I mean, there's no knock to my parents, but like we never had a talk. We never did, like, there was never any kind of communication. I definitely didn't have it in that setting. There was no like, I don't know, these topics that you hit on as far as what comes along with purity culture. There was no actual conversation. It's just the basics of like, you want to stay away from lust and all that.
I had it's a blessing and a curse, truthfully, to be a preacher's kid, because my dad didn't know how to handle. Well, he didn't know how to handle me, but I was awful. You know, my dad and mom did the best they could, and they almost shipped me off to military school, and that would have been the end of it. I would have never come back home if they would have done that. Like, seriously, I wouldn't have. There's no way. People told them to get rid of me and all this, kill me, but, you know, send me off. I needed
Put them down.
Like, a bunch of people left the church.
Take them out back in the field.
A bunch of people left the church because of me in my wild days. And, you know, my dad had the sex talk with me, you know, of course, but, you know, he eventually started like reaching out to people in the church who were like, I looked up to, like Tim Clatts, my cousin, right? But he sent me off to spend weekends with Tim. Not sure I got the advice my dad was hoping to get from Tim. We just stayed up all night and drank Mountain Dew and played Call of Duty and Halo 3. I mean, he talked to me nothing about it except for like, hey man, you know, maybe listen to your dad and don't have sex. That was about the gist of it, and real awkward. Like, you want to go play basketball too? Sure. Then he'd have like the keyboardist, Steve Holland, love Steve. But I vividly remember that I made a joke with him at my dad's 35th anniversary a few weeks ago. He sat down on my bed with me one day. He's like, he always called me Bubba. I was like, hey Bubba.
Yeah, hear it now.
Yeah, he's like, you just maybe calm down and maybe keep some of this stuff to yourself. Like, maybe just don't put it out there like this. He goes, we're all wild. We all went through a phase, and you're going to be okay. Just be safe. And he said, just hard on your parents. Just keep it under wraps. And I was like, oh man.
Yeah. Then
worst comes to worst, Scotty Adams. Scotty's like big brother to me. Love Scotty. Used to keep cocaine in his snare drum underneath. Like, not crazy dude. He comes and talks to me one day. He's like, hey man, you're going to have sex. Just make sure to wrap it. This was the advice I was getting from these people my dad was trying to have talking to me. So I did not have to answer this question, because my youth pastors, I had like 3 different ones over the course of my youth group. I love them all. Well, one's dead recently.
Well, you still love him or her?
Him, he's dead. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, and divorced. Not because he's dead. Yeah, dead and divorced. No, it was divorce, suicide. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Divorce, suicide, no suicide.
I'm not cutting this out. You can't.
It's fine anyway.
Demonetized. You can't say that on YouTube.
You're not going to American shorts this.
American shorts?
American flag shorts.
Oh, no, this is fine. He's dead. It's fine. Anyway, listen. My other youth pastors, they just didn't know how to talk about this kind of stuff. They didn't talk about this kind of stuff. So I did not have that support system.
Did they have experiences from their past life to be able to like talk about those things?
All 3 of mine did.
They did?
I would guess. They never talked about it, but just based on how they act, their party, they all had party stories.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked about that, like drugs and alcohol. So I would assume if you lived a drugs and alcohol lifestyle, you probably had experience with it, would be my guess. I don't know. Putting 2 and 2 together.
I don't know.
But I did not have that support system there. And the people in my youth group, though, none of us really cared about the purity culture stuff. We were all just deviants. My whole youth group was just awful.
Just a room of demons up there.
Except for Tanner. Oh, Tanner pretty much abided by the rules. Yeah. Tanner was pretty much a rule follower.
He was probably stressed the whole time, wasn't he?
I stressed Tanner out all the time. I constantly was making Tanner.
You probably still stress him out.
I do, and all the time. But, you know, most of us all just did.
R.I.P. Tanner.
Oh, yeah. R.I.P. That's who I was talking about. He's dead.
He's dead. And then divorced.
Yeah. Sorry, Mariah. Anyway, so, you know, I didn't have nobody in our youth, except for the weird kids outside of Tanner. All the weird kids would be like, 3 or 4, like, oh my gosh, like people from Phoenix or Phoenicians, you know, Louis C.K., like the weird kids. But most everybody else was still doing drugs, having sex, drinking alcohol, and just moved on with their life. So I didn't have any of this support system, even though we all preached hypocrisy of, living the outward life that was that way. But we all knew behind the scenes we weren't living that way outside of a couple. So I didn't have the support system. I didn't have peer pressure to be better. And if I did, I just, flexed the preacher's kid power and made it go away for the most part. So that was my support system. I didn't have one.
That's good to know as a youth pastor to make sure I talk about these things for sure.
Often.
Next Wednesday.
This is going to be your topic for next Wednesday?
No, we got to get through the gospel of Luke, but
I did have a support system. My parents were always super open, and I did have the talk and explanations given to me and all that kind of stuff. And I never had if I was ever interested in a girl or anything, it was my parents were never like, oh, don't, wait, or don't, they were like, you.
Wait, they said don't wait?
No.
Don't
my
wait.
parents, if I was ever
I just hear Bill. Zach, if you
Don't
feel
wait,
it, don't
Zach.
wait.
if I was ever interested in a girl, they were never discouraging.
Yeah, no,
or
neither were my
anything like
parents.
that. But if I was liking someone and, they noticed or whatever, several times my parents would be like, do you are you sure you're interested? Do you see yourself, are you compatible? Asking good questions.
Yeah.
And that saved me, quite a few times from just, not even going down the road of sex, but just spending time in a relationship that wasn't going to work anyway.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
I did have those kind of things. I would get the passive comments from the super goody two shoes kids or some, not youth pastors, but other elders in the church being like, what you're doing is taking away from relationship with God, and you're just going to lead you to hell.
God.
Having sex before marriage is gateway to hell, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I did hear those kind of things, or especially when you went to what we call crossfires, these regional rallies of church, and you go in there and almost every one of those did talk about sex, and it would hammer in
yeah, now it's all about social media and how much you focus your time
I
on.
will say that I don't remember ever going to a church conference where there wasn't an altar call directly targeted toward lust.
Yeah.
Ever.
And see, I see why that's a good thing, but at the same time, it's demonizing lust is bad, but also we are
it's
genetically
yes.
and biologically created to procreate, and seeing someone who's attractive at a young age, your body is I want to procreate with that person.
And the problem with men is we all know.
Do what?
The problem with men is everybody knows when you feel that.
Yeah. And it's instead of, yes, you need to be delivered if you're just lusting 24/7, you can't look at a woman without being procreate, then yeah, you got a problem.
PC.
Yeah. But redirecting those thoughts and trying to understand why you feel those feelings and why you're having those thoughts would be such a much more effective way. That's what we do with toddlers and kids when they're having these big emotions.
Giant toddlers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're giant toddlers that think they know everything and then they can drive.
Well, to me, youth group outside, I'm being kind of serious, outside of being a toddler are the most formative relearning your learning experiences of your years. And you are having to learn to be an adult as in your youth group years. And you're building those foundational blocks that you'll take with you going forward, or tearing down ones that should be built and getting bad ones put in their place.
And the youth group is supposed to be a supplement to a home life that is also teaching those foundational truths. So if they're not being taught those at home, coming on one Wednesday isn't going to necessarily change something dramatically. It may, God can change anyone dramatically, but the home has to be teaching that sex is a good thing, but you need to make sure that you're going to be with that person forever. You're going to be married to that person. And sex before marriage, I know you made mention of that before, but I know of all the bad times. I was talking to Leslie this morning about it, asking her thoughts and before she was going to work. And, I wish so desperately I would have never had sex before I married Leslie.
I was going to talk about this later. Yeah.
And she says the same thing, but even even though, she had Leo, and Leo is an incredible blessing to our lives and stuff. So, we just, I don't know. I lost my train of thought there.
I did vaguely.
I am going to circle back on what you were saying at the end where we talk about how does this idea of purity culture impact your parenting style.
Oh, okay.
That's where I'm going to talk about those kind of things. So you can come back to that thought if it comes back to you.
Yeah, it probably will.
Is there a section on or is this the section on things that we've heard, like teachings that came out of purity culture?
I would say a lot of that just falls into, the like a support system, like the people that were around us that were teaching this, that were molding how we went about our young lives and how we interacted with women. Because like for me personally, like this whole topic, I feel like extremely stunted how I interact with women. Like I'm not to say I cannot have like a healthy, a normal relationship with women.
You had a sister.
Yeah.
You have a sister.
I did have a sister, RIP.
It was her. She divorced.
No. But no, it's like, I don't know, like the honor and respect that we're supposed to have. I think we take that away whenever we talk about purity culture in an unhealthy way, when we use that in a different light. That honor and respect.
And I should have brought this up. I don't know why I'm just thinking about it now. When you asked like what purity culture was, the big gist of it was like shame people out of sin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so like I never directly had these things taught to me, but I was.
Yeah, so I would say we move into this topic because I think we're more or less hiding around it as far as like, when was it that quote unquote purity culture in the unhealthy aspect that you brought, like when did it start to feel like it was a negative thing in your life?
Let me say this these couple verses real quick before we get into that, because this is, from what I understand, this is like the foundation.
He's raising his hand.
I feel like I want to brag on JP and this group real quick for a minute. This feels like the best laid out, following a plot point, having conversation episode we've had yet. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you for that,
JP.
JP.
That off pod, but thanks. Whatever.
No, sometimes you just need to be reeled in. So
it's great.
When I was doing some reading and stuff this morning, 1 Thessalonians 4:3-8, and I'm going to read from the New Living Translation, was talking about how this was kind of like the bedrock and the foundation for the purity culture and everything. And so it says, God's will is for you to be holy, so stay away from all sexual sin. Then each of you will control his own body and live in holiness and honor, not in lustful passion like the pagans who do not know God and his ways. Never harm or cheat a fellow believer in this matter by violating his wife, for the Lord avenges all such sins. As we have solemnly warned you before, God has called us to live holy lives, not impure lives. Therefore, anyone who refuses to live by these rules is not disobeying human teaching, but is rejecting God, who gives his Holy Spirit to you. And so I think moving into this next topic, that's a good foundation for those listening to understand, like, and I think Zach alluded to, or Jonathan alluded to it before, that the foundation for the purity movement was not one of wrongdoing and a group of adults who wanted to point their fingers at their kids and be like, you guys are awful. It probably came from, it came from a point of, hey, we understand and seen what happened in the 60s and 70s. And we seen what happened when HIV or AIDS was the number one cause of death in the 1990s for US men, 25 to 44, those who grew up in those sexual revolution movements. And so, like, thinking of purity culture with the heart that people didn't want to see their kids suffering from AIDS, obviously is going to become overbearing to a lot of them. But I think it's good for us to kind of understand that the mindset from the adults was, let's protect our children. And then let's show scripture says that we're not just disobeying our parents when we are sexual immorality, are being sexual impure, but we're actually rejecting God's word and his commandments as his creation. And that's why we're seeing the negative effects of it. So,
I think we didn't talk about I don't think there's another spot to really talk about this. And it kind of ties into the negative connotation of everything I just lost my train of thought. I had it and then I forgot what it was. So for me, I'll just jump back into his question is, when did I start feeling this had a negative connotation on everything? I think then I realized that I didn't love the teaching of it, because even though I was rebellious and partying and everything, I just still just like, why? There was no grace in it. And now I know that we're in the hyper
fixated,
hyperized,
gluttoned
fixations,
a gluttony of grace. Grace is the grace movement here.
Yeah,
probably too far the other pendulum here. But then I did not like the emphasis on, if you have sex pre-marriage, if you lust after a woman, look at pornography, if you purity culture, even going into like partying, that kind of stuff was like lumped in with it. You're not a real Christian, or you're going to go to hell for this, or it's like the unforgivable sin having sex. Like, sex before marriage was right up there with like top 3 commandments in youth group. Not that it was taught on all the time. It was like an unspoken thing. You just knew. I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was preached, but I just really felt like it was like an unspoken, if you have sex, you will go to hell.
Excommunicate.
Yes.
You are done.
That's going back to where I mentioned that sex is something that was given to us by God, and if it's not looked in the view, see, Satan takes sex and twists it into something disgusting and dirty, into a Hustler magazine that a 9-year-old Garrett is introduced to. And now I'm like looking at porn at such a young age and not understand. I just heard a few years ago, probably when I was still at Lifeline, and Pastor John was teaching up there, that sex was a good thing from God and that Satan has distorted it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard that before,
Yeah.
Like, God did create sex, but people twist it and make it into something it's not.
Yeah.
The big thing about purity culture, at least from my experience and viewpoint, was like, we did get that teaching that like sex was good and created by God. But not for me.
Oh, I thought that was just hard. I was like, okay.
But like, it's good and from God.
Mm-hmm.
But don't even think about it.
Yeah.
Until you're married.
Or you're going to hell. Straight to hell.
Like,
straight to hell. Yeah.
You're right. It was like a capital sin.
Mm-hmm.
And
I get the meaning. I understand where they're coming from, because, I was going to talk about this a little later too, but it's just too hard not to segue part of this for me. When I got saved, I let go of drugs and alcohol borderline miraculously. I wasn't like a heroin addict, like having to, survive off of it, but I was into a few different drugs and daily usage, and then drank all day, every day when I wasn't at school or whatever.
Alcohol's a drug.
Yeah. So, it was all I knew for 7 years, and then just never, when I got saved, never craved it again. But one thing I just assumed I was healed of at the same time was lust, was, sexual morality. And then it took multiplied years, still struggle with it today, to realize I never let that go. And I think goes back to this purity culture thing that I think subliminally, and I'm just now wrestling with this like over the last few years, is that two things, what Garrett circled back on. There's what I call soul scars of certain sins. Not that you can't be forgiven of them, but I do believe giving yourself to other people is a soul scar.
Yeah.
Now I do think there's context where it could be okay, widowed, get remarried, and that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm just talking about like,
What'd you
contradicting?
What'd you say?
I don't know. I don't
know. What time stamp is that?
I heard cock and rock. What? That is what I heard.
I mean, it fits, but that's not what I said. But that's amazing. I wish I'd said it. Well, I'll go with it. I mean, if you cock and rock with too many people, I mean,
Good Lord.
I don't
Anyway.
think that was context, but we're good.
Anyway, no, I think, outside of the like carnal flesh, like just having sex to have sex, those leave soul scars is what I call them. Doesn't mean God can't heal them, but it's like, I have these 3 scars on my wrist right here from a birthday party at Garrett's where we were jumping over semi tires and a piece of metal came out and cut my hand. I'm healed of it, but I still have the scar. And I believe you have those. And I believe that part of the thing I didn't get healing from that because I just suppressed that, kept it hidden for so long, never really confessed to God what I had done there because it was either so out in the open or nobody knew about it. I didn't feel like I had to. I think purity culture played a huge part in that warped view of sex and that warped view of lust and that warped view. Not that it, like I said, it's not that the youth pastors and the preachers were wrong. It's wrong. But how they stressed that wrong and how, because I never heard about, you have sex before marriage, you look at pornography, struggle pornography, how to come to God and be clean of that. Yeah. It's always like, you're wrong.
Don't do it again.
You're wrong. Yeah, don't do it again. It never how to really repent.
Just stop.
Ask for forgiveness. Sure. Yeah, just stop. Or ask for forgiveness. But there's a huge difference between just asking for forgiveness and repenting.
Yeah,
no one ever taught me how to repent. I mean, my dad did, but I wasn't going to go to my dad and be like, Dad, I need help. I've been beating it off to the J.C. Penney magazine. I can't do that. So, how am I supposed to talk to Dad about that?
R.I.P. J.C. Penney.
Oh, man.
I put the magazines out of business.
Gosh.
All those pages were just stuck together.
I had a good point to make mention, but then you said J.C. Penney, and
I have something, but I think JP was gonna go first.
Nope.
Was that thunder?
Yeah.
It is. It's supposed to rain.
Storm.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I think, sorry, just to close that point out, talking about you, because you mentioned it, sex before marriage. I regret so much all the sexual things that I had done prior to marriage and the things that I carried into my marriage and still struggle with today root back to me not having a actually real understanding of biblical, how to handle these things biblically and who Jesus is in relation to lust. You know what I mean?
I would say that the issue of purity culture and how it was managed in our generation is one of the biggest driving factors to why like guys like us do not have good relationships with other men, like healthy, like got like just like accountability, like all that goes into like a Christian walk with one another because of the shame, because of the lack of understanding, because of the guilt and just otherwise like confusion that comes with the damage that we kind of inflict upon ourselves in this.
Yeah. And these topics are so sensitive that it's like, you don't want to bring it up to another guy that you're struggling with, having sex before marriage, because like, they're going to be like, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Good job that you had sex. Like, that's the whole goal, ain't it? You know?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I've also seen like those teachings about the scars and stuff. I've seen them taken to extremes as well, where you end up having like young women being told that like they're used up.
Yeah.
Or making some
used up.
Or making
it's
some
the last punch card.
Or making some and I'm not gonna be graphic.
It's like Borat, the slave of a wizard.
Yes.
And I'm not going to be graphic, but telling young women that like making up crazy biological lies about what happens to their body if they have sex.
There was
and all of these things, and then you have young women who are like, "Well, I messed up once; it's too late." And so
it's not just women. I've heard that from men, and that's why I actually talked to John about it once.
Exactly.
Was my feeling disqualified because the things I've done post marriage. It's just like God can't use me. And it's just, how do you overcome that kind of thing?
And I've heard and read of teachings where pastors would be like, if, it's unfairly targeted toward women, or was, but like, if you have sex, like you may meet your husband, but he won't want you, or like all of these crazy things.
Yeah.
That are, it's solely based on shame.
One of the things I'd heard was when you have sex with, multiple partners, you can never actually be one with somebody because you've given yourself away. And that's one of the things.
Horcrux.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
actually, yeah.
And I have never heard like a pastor address what happens if you're raped, what happens if you're assaulted.
To me, I feel like that should just be an unspoken.
Right.
I just, it doesn't.
Alexa had a kid come to her when we took a young adult come to her when we took our young adults to ramp.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked about this.
Everybody has a crazy ramp story.
And this young woman who's 18 or 19 comes to Alexa and she says, Alexa, I was abused and raped. Does that mean that like I'm too far gone? Like will my husband not want me now? And the fact that she even thought that coming out of a church service means that we're so far off in left field with how to approach this subject. Well, that like something was wrong if that's the thought she had coming out of that.
And doubly, I feel like there's too much of an emphasis maybe in this hyper grace era where, you know, when you're dating or even new, everybody doesn't have to know everything about you. You know what I mean? Not saying you withhold information, but like you don't just have to word vomit every mistake you've ever made to everybody that needs that, you know, you don't have to do that. I think that's part of it is, you know, another part of you looking back at purity culture, some of the stuff's coming back to me. It's like, well, you know, you need to tell everybody what happened so everybody can know. You know, it's just.
I would say the thing that I was going to say before that was I struggled with pornography growing up. And that was something that was like, as far as like trying to live holy and all this stuff. And, you know, me and Zach being the virgin club here, going to marriage, like I'm happy about that.
Luna's never had sex.
Wow. Luna.
She just opened her eyes and looked at you side-eyed.
Heaven is going to greet you with open arms.
Yeah.
With a crown.
Well,
but
change your name to Mary.
I never mentioned my issue with pornography until I was probably in my 20s. And it was with a pastor. And it was in the context of like me and Kate, like I had shared this with Caitlin. I'd actually shared it with Caitlin first, who I'd been dating shortly. And it was received well from her, but I still felt like I needed somebody, like a guy to come alongside me and be like, I'll walk this out and all this stuff. And the pastor had said, you know, I kind of wish you hadn't have told her that because she will never forgive you for that.
That's insane.
It's insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And immediately I told myself that I'd made a mistake.
Repress.
I knew, yes, I repressed my emotions, but I also recognized the issue with the help that I was being given. And the solution that I got was, you know, codes on all my phones that he had. And
so did you stop immediately, or did you still struggle and feel like you had to hide it?
It wasn't even like an issue. Like I wasn't struggling with pornography at that time. It was one of those things that, like, long story short, just there was a disconnect between me and Caitlin and you know, like wanting to connect better just in a relationship. And I expressed to her, like, I feel like I have this vulnerability issue because of a pornography addiction I've had majority of my life.
I had to.
And so that's a very real reality. And the problem with the advice that I given was the solution that he gave me was not the solution that I was needing at the time. I was needing like relationship, and it all came up in the wash because that pastor ended up having his own sexual stuff in the future.
Well, I mean, I had to work through that in therapy recently. I mean, just, you know, I carried that baggage with me for so long, amongst other things, that I just kept to myself. I didn't know how else to address them. And then finally I had to get help, you know. Doesn't, you know, it's not a healing, you know. I think there's certain things that we're just cursed to carry for our whole life. And not curse is maybe the wrong word, but you know, there's just certain things like I'm always going to be, that's going to be my susceptibility. So, you know, that I will struggle with.
We're obviously in the portion where we're talking about like our lives today.
Yes. And also it tilts back to negative connotations, because that's where all this came from.
And like how we kind of come to this point of view, on the story I was sharing, something that kind of solidified where I stood with this topic really, was purity, purity to me is something that it is a standard that I hold myself to,
Yep.
To a certain degree, because that is what God has called me to. But there is, like we've talked about in the beginning, there's grace and truth that's with it as well. And you want to be in a relationship with people that have the capacity to give grace. And whenever I had shared Caitlin that issue that I had, that like in that moment, how she handled it was like one of the biggest signs of like, this is the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with. I had shared it with that pastor in the moment. Later on in the conversation, he had said, sometimes I wish his wife had watched porn because
I wouldn't wish that on
sex
nobody.
would be better.
Wow.
I wouldn't wish pornography.
And it probably also like psychologically had this effect of like, I've been lied to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
well, there's no bigger thief of, I think, especially modern day. And I know this because, me and Garrett, I worked with a lot of younger people, mainly women, and you hear them talk about their lives, and they talk very bluntly and openly about their lives. And I think one of the worst things that's happened today is that obviously I'm super anti-porn, even though I've struggled with it forever. Porn, and honestly now modern books, movies, give such an unrealistic view of sex and what sex is and how it's going to be, and honestly marriage too. And purity culture never did anything to address. I would have rather had a youth pastor come up to me and be honest with me about like, hey, here's what sex is, here's what it's not, and here's what marriage is, and here's what's not. But that's so taboo. And I know there's time and place, and yes, you may have to have these conversations with men or the boys, and have, let's use Garrett and Leslie's example. Garrett may have to sit down and disciple some of the older boys, and Leslie sit down and disciple some of the older girls. But I'm just as I've gotten older, very passionate about people needing to understand that both sex and marriage aren't what you see Hollywood and porn and everything make it out to be. And I know way too many people in my life that have fallen victim to that mindset. And, you see it all the time. You start to wonder, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my marriage? What's wrong with, why can't I be like, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, like they're whatever, that kind of stuff.
I want to circle back on a positive thing about purity culture with Leslie. I was talking to her today, and
that's good.
Yeah, first time. Yeah, she wakes up this morning at like 5:30, and she comes out. She hadn't even drank her coffee yet. And I'm like, "What do you think about purity culture? And what have you dealt with that?" And so she sits down in the bathroom, and then we got a chair in the bathroom. She starts sipping her coffee, and she's telling me, and she said, she heard a sermon from a youth pastor or something, or a senior pastor, I don't know, about the importance of remaining pure until you're married, because the repercussions of not could be damaging, and she took that to heart, and she always tried to be as modest as possible, which I think is a very important, aspect, that when you seek a woman, you want them to be modest. And I remember this moment of Leslie showing me how modest she is as we were working out at Planet Fitness.
I don't think I've ever heard that phrase before. Like, my wife showed me how modest she is.
Modesty is the hottest.
I'm telling you. And so, we're at Planet Fitness. It's like 5:00 in the afternoon. It's packed house. We've been working out a lot and everything. And so she was going to be doing these workouts where she'd like bend over, and I remember sitting there, and it's those small things. And so she, instead of facing her butt towards the open area of Planet Fitness, she turns around and faces it right up against the wall, so that it couldn't be seen, obviously. And that was a moment in my, our early time of dating, or we just got married, of just seeing like, Leslie truly cares about, how modest she is. And that is a byproduct of growing up as a millennial, right at that ending age of the purity culture and stuff, where, she understood the importance of being a modest woman and not like trying to put herself out there or anything like that. Cause you know, she,
these are, it's good because they're like you said, these are things that Leslie had picked up. It's not something that you are imposing on her as her husband.
right.
Mhm.
It's not
Yep.
something that she feels pressure to. She feels permission to live, like to do these things because of a certain level of respect that she has for herself.
Yeah.
Now that respect, like modesty, I think is circumstantial, like or is it's different for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
It's different for all body types,
Mhm.
and so
We all know what Mike Tyson's is after the fight last night.
So that was a humiliation ritual.
I saw that too.
Yeah.
And
Saw
so
Jake Paul didn't give him a black eye too. Give him
You're
the
right.
one
Came
pack.
out in a panda suit.
Yep. Mhm.
and
Shout out
so
Illuminati.
Oh no.
oh no. So yeah, when it comes to things like modesty and all that stuff, in the context of relationships, it's always best to check my, like, as a husband, my own pride, my own expectations, or my own,
Yeah. Talking about it in terms of marriage, like I just bucked the system and did what I wanted to do. And now, yes, that had repercussions for me today. I'm still working with, but like, I think of like my wife who's very passionate about purity culture and like the
which
detrimental to her.
I think we should go ahead and say we're not going to overshare.
Alexa's very passionate
Yes.
as well, which is great.
And not because we had floated just timing wise, couldn't get
Yeah.
it together. This could be a whole nother part 2 episode with
Yes.
our wives discussing
Yes.
it,
And
because
it's-
the impact on women, at least on a
Mhm.
cursory level, is way more obvious than it was on men. I would wager to say for most.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to share her story, but just a brief, like how it changed it, because it has affected our marriage, because she had a much harder time with purity culture because hers was very much, if I do anything wrong, if, she was
very legalistic.
very legalistic, she was very old line Baptist kind of thing, but it was very much like less about the hell. Yes, that was a part of it, but like everybody's going to be so disappointed in me. And if you know my wife, she's very type A, very people like
Shame.
Yes, very shame driven, and like my parents won't love me. I'm think I'm being fairly true to what she says, but this is my interpretation. My parents won't love me. They're going to be disappointed in me. God won't love me. And that has played such a huge part in her life, her upbringing. What she's carried into marriage is this warped view of purity, this warped view of sex, this warped view of relationship and love.
Mhm.
And it was all driven from a guilt, fear, shame standpoint, where I did not get that. But I know for many women that I've talked to or went to youth group with who since have been around, they very much had that shame, guilt, mindset where we were just more like, you're bad, you're going to hell.
There was
But without the shame.
There was a story from a girl that we worked with. And it's so cool that like Abby was able to persevere through that shame and to understand her identity as enough to, not walk away from the faith,
Mhm.
because the story I'm about to share, this girl walked away from faith because of that. And she was going to this church, and I don't know, remember the name, which I wouldn't say anyways, but she's going to this church, and this pastor was talking about how a woman who has sex before marriage is like a piece of tape. And every time she has sex, it's like sticking the piece of tape down and ripping it back up and
Mhm.
sticking it down and ripping it back up. And then eventually that tape becomes useless and worthless and has no value anymore. And I remember her specifically telling me that story, and you might have been in there when she told us that story. And it was just like a shock to me, because part of me believes that I have like this unique perspective because I've only been saved. I've been saved like 6.5 years. I didn't grow up in this. I didn't do anything church related except youth group and just play dodgeball and basketball, but to hear that's the things that people are being taught, it's no wonder people walk away from the faith if you're going to tell them they're a useless piece of non-sticky tape.
You know where they get that from? A misinterpretation of salt losing its saltiness. I've heard, because I've heard a youth pastor at a rally make that comparison, and I was like,
crazy out of context.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. And that's the thing. And I'm glad my church didn't do those kind of things. They just avoided it for the most part.
Yeah.
When they did talk about, like I said, high school gym teacher addressing it, just means well, didn't do well.
Right.
But I've heard at these rallies that I went to, that's the kind of stuff you hear. And that's why people get such bad, warped, not only bad theology, but if that's what you're teaching, it just makes you, that's why you see so many people who were actively in youth group turn their back on God, never come back.
Absolutely.
It's because of stuff like that. And whether it's intentional or not, like now that kind of stuff, I don't know how you can't read scripture. Either you have people who shouldn't be in leadership, not like in a malicious way. They just weren't qualified to be in leadership.
What I see, and this is not, has anything to do with purity culture, but like people don't know what the word even says. And I'm not saying I know all the stuff in the word, because I don't know all the stuff in the word, but like all you have to do is just look up what salt even represents in the Old Testament. And it's supposed to represent the covenant that God gave us. You know, it's like, it doesn't represent having sex, but what I've understood and seen is people are just super biblically uneducated. Yeah.
One of my favorite things I've ever seen posted, it was just a little line. It said, "Don't let people with bad reading comprehension tell you what the Bible says."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like
That's good.
people brag all the time. They're like, "Well, I can barely read at a 4th grade level." That for me, that's a turn off.
Yeah.
Like if that's really what you believe, like if it's not obvious you're making a joke, like I'm out. I'm not going to listen to what you have to say if you're like, I can barely read.
Yeah. I know it's true.
Because why would I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we're gonna base our theology around, I know we're off topic.
Yeah.
We're gonna base our
Well, it's not
theology
really
around
off
a book,
topic.
then I need to understand like verbs and nouns and context and all of these different things.
And you gotta, I mean, there's due diligence. If you're going to do a sermon, or even if you're, I don't mean this as a slight, like if you're a youth pastor and you're doing this, like you're not the head pastor and you're going to preach at a youth rally or something like that, it's still important to like find the context, cross-reference context, understand what you're saying. You know, I expect, you know, there was this big thing when I was like younger that if you weren't the senior pastor, you kind of expected it to be a little less than growing up. I don't feel that way now, but growing up, that's just kind of the expectation. And unfortunately, it lived up a lot of the time. You'd senior pastor would have his stuff in a row, but the youth pastor who was speaking at a youth convention would try to be cool and relevant and say something stupid. Like, you know, you sticky tape because salt loses its saltiness, trying to make a point, trying to drive a point home, maybe meant well, but didn't realize the damage that he was doing to somebody with an analogy like that. You know what I mean? I think that just goes back to circling back to that. I think at the top, people meant well with a lot of what they did, but had no clue the therapy bills that they were going to cost us all eventually. So, anyway, yeah. So transitioning. Did we thoroughly answer how has this perception of purity changed in marriage?
Here, I've got some stats.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
No,
JP's gonna go. Then go.
No, hit it.
What this is this is actually, I haven't like fully read this book, but
Name and author?
Sheila Ray Gregoire.
It's a weird title name.
Wait, she reads better.
She Deserves Better is the name of the book. Sorry.
Speaking of,
She reads better at 4th grade levels.
I have read her. I've read her other
Girl on.
book, which I also recommend, called The Great Sex Rescue. It's also full of stats and is very good. But this is what she has here is like some charts that have a common message that came out of purity culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then she interviewed, I think it's like 10,000 women.
Okay.
And she asked them, like, you know, what are the experiences of this in your marriage or in your life now? So here's one. The effects of the message, quote, "You have a responsibility to protect boys around you by wearing modest clothing."
Okay.
And so here's some stats.
Protect boys. That's wild.
30% of the women, only 30% of the women answered and said, "My marriage has not been abusive." 24% answered and said, "I've experienced vaginismus."
What's that?
Like inability to have sex.
Oh,
20% said, I have below self-esteem currently. Below average self-esteem currently. Only 19% said, I have above average marital satisfaction. And then 19% said, I had below average self-esteem in high school. Let's see. The effects of the message: boys will struggle with their visual nature in a way that girls will never understand. 45% of women said, I've experienced vaginismus. 45% of the women that answered.
Now, vaginismus, that's a medical condition,
Yes.
though. Okay, yeah.
24%, only 24% said, my marriage has not been abusive. And so what we're doing is we're screwing up
Yeah.
marriages without even knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a bunch of, like,
It's just 'cause
here's
people are
another one.
willingly
Boys
uneducated.
can't help but lust after a girl who's dressed like she's trying to incite it.
Well, at a cursory level, sure, they can't help it, but they should be able to control it.
46% said, I'm often afraid that my husband will look at pornography or other women. 36% said, I engage in sex with my husband only because I feel I have to.
dang.
29% said, I often feel uncomfortable about how my husband looks at other women while we're in public. 29% said, I have below average self-esteem currently, just because of these, like, little snippets of things we, like, people, pastors, youth pastors said.
Can we just agree? And I've said this 3 times already, and I've become more advocate about this all the time. People need to be open in a safe environment. You don't want to just broadcast about their struggles. Everybody is going through something in a marriage that nobody else knows about, and they think they're the only ones going through it. I can speak from personal experience about multiple things that I thought I am the only person on earth having this issue. Sure enough, open up. Oh, 8 or 9 of my other married friends are going through the exact same thing or have gone through it. Especially if you've been married for any amount of time. You know, and same thing. I can't imagine going through, like, knowing what I've known now. If I could have opened up about some of the things I was struggling with 8 or 9 years ago, me and Abby wouldn't have almost got divorced in 21. You know, we could have opened up. Oh, wow. You know, you're going through the same thing. Oh, let's talk about it. Let's work it out. We got in therapy earlier and seen some warning signs, but we just bit our lips and moved on, thinking we're the only people on this planet going through this. Maybe it's just our marriage, but no, it's stuff like this that everybody's going through, but we feel like there's this taboo that you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think once again, that goes back to purity culture, this shame driven thing that you just have to just kind of woman suffer, like a Handmaid's Tale, just, you know, suffer and move on. So that's.
Yeah. And the sensitivity of the topics, like we talked about earlier, no one wants to talk about hypersensitive topics, especially if it's personal things, especially if someone could see that topic and see a vulnerable side of you as a man or as a woman, you know, that you are struggling. And something that I've learned recently, especially in marriage, is that when Leslie and I have a struggle and I'll see Pastor Jeff and talk to him, he's like, oh, wow, you guys and 99% of other married couples deal with the exact same thing, you know? And it's like, it's good to know that there are people out there that have shared in the same struggles, whether it be pornography, lust, addiction, you know, whatever it may be.
I'm going to go up to Jeff one day and say, I need to talk to him. And I'm going to go and be like, come up with the most off the wall, bizarre thing that would never happen to anybody. Like, this is what I'm dealing with my marriage. And he's going to be like,
That happens to half the congregation.
Look at this. This is really cool. This is a
I would believe it,
comparison.
probably.
Word cloud comparisons of the most common words in the New Testament: Jesus, Lord, love, believe, faith. These are the most common words in books written to young women in the period of like the 90s and 2000s. Love, sex, purity, husband, wait, Satan, Jesus, tempt, virginity, clothes is on there.
what is it?
Clothes.
Oh, clothes. I thought you were saying clothes.
And so, like,
That's
you
what I
have
was
this
saying, yeah.
like really stark juxtaposition of like what young women are consuming when you're like, why don't you read a Christian book? They just go grab one off the shelf that's like to young women.
Hangman's Curse.
Yeah.
And they're getting everything that the New Testament like does not find that important. It's like, forget about Jesus, forget about faith and perseverance and all this kind of stuff. Let's talk about what you wear.
Yep.
And how it affects the boys around you. And then you get all those charts about when we get married and everything's screwed.
Yeah. So
not in a good way.
Yeah, not in the fun way. So talking about, with marriage, that it does involve being a parent. So how does this idea of purity culture kind of impact your parenting style? Because we all have girls, every one of us. And I think purity culture specifically was harder on, I've said it earlier, harder on girls than it is boys. I'm purposely saying girls and boys, not men and women, because there's girls and boys. How are you going to navigate after everything we've talked about, how hard some of the things we've struggled with, how hard it was for us in some ways. How are you going to navigate this with specifically from a girl's lens for your kid? JP, I'll start with you.
I mean, all four of us have girls. So this is definitely prevalent. For me personally, what I've been thinking about and praying about is how I can love my wife and be an example for what a pure and healthy relationship can be, because purity in itself is healthy. Like it's purity isn't necessarily sterile.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think there has to be mess involved in all that. So I know for me personally, like having parents that you see have PDA or can make up after a fight, like, that whole conflict resolution, as far as letting that be a way. And this doesn't sound like purity, I know, but it's setting an example for when we talk about purity and how we probably should frame it in nowadays, like an idea of standard. Because like you talked about this earlier, as far as like the idea of like youth's dating, of like, you need to be able to kind of know what you like. Do you need an outgoing person? Do you need a not outgoing type of person? Do you need someone who's into sports? Or like, you need to understand what you get. But I feel like that example first and foremost comes from us as parents. And I know for me personally as a father, I want to not objectify my daughter, but I want to validate any beauty, any gifting, any anything about her, so that she has a full understanding of what is pure and holy in her life. So that she can find somebody who sees the same thing, if not more, in a true and genuine way.
Yeah. So I think for me, echo everything you just said. So, we already do our affirmations daily. And she repeats those, just starting to get those entrenched in her now. But also I think as she gets older, and obviously you don't deal with it now. I mean, now older now is young compared to what we were, because how kids experience life and stuff now. But, just making sure that she understands like two things. One, no matter what you do, cannot separate you from the love of Jesus or the love of me and Abby as Violet's parents. No matter what you do, you're always loved. My parents did do that to me. Maybe not in the way that was, and I'm sure they did, but looking back on it, it was less what they said and more their actions that proved that to me, which is the best way to prove it anyway, because words are just words until actions back them. But, my parents proved that to me in both ways, but I want to make sure I do that for Violet too. That, no matter what she does, what mistakes she makes, because she will make them, and make that clear that she's going to make mistakes. Now what they are, I don't know, but we love her no matter what the point. So I think those two things are very important for me in terms of when we get to this purity culture point of her life, or whatever that may look like at that point. Cause hopefully she's in church, and we'll have Lorelai and Violet at the same youth group. So that'll be something.
Maybe I'll be their youth pastor 15 years from now.
One could only hope.
Yeah.
15 years, maybe 50, almost 50 years old.
No, and they'll be 18, 15 years from now.
Oh, yuck.
Dang.
Yuck. Yucca. Anyway, where they're going with that. Oh, so making sure that she knows they're loved, nothing can separate her from those two things. But B, not doing the birds and the bees talk in that specific way. I don't know how I'll address that, but, making sure that they know that, like, boys are boys and they're going to objectify you. They're going to lust after you. And you're, I'm a boy and I want to make sure to like, hey, there are good, I don't know how to have that conversation, but I want to be blunt about it. I think that's going to be my parenting point. Once we get to that point, is being blunt about it and making sure she understands it and not being scared of it, but also knowing how to handle, like, it's going to happen. She's not going into blind to anything. I don't know. Me and Abby have such different perspectives because Abby did live about as faultless of a life as she could have lived prior to marriage. And I lived the total opposite way. So she can get two genuine different perspectives of it all. But I think everything's just going to circle back to those first 2 points. It's like, you're going to mess up. You're going to make mistakes, but nothing can separate you from Jesus or me and your mom.
Yeah, Zach.
I like to reiterate again what JP said, just making sure that Ella sees like a healthy example of relationship and a healthy example of sex and all of the like husband and wife that love each other and can apologize. I've made it a big point to make sure that like I apologize to Ella.
Mm-hmm.
Another big thing is that we've already been teaching her is that she has control over what she does with her body. If she doesn't want to hug Uncle so-and-so, she doesn't have to. If she doesn't want to kiss Grandpa goodbye, if she tells me, she's like, Daddy, that's enough, then that's enough.
Yep.
I'm not going to argue with her. I'm not going to do any of these things because if we normalize that, then it's normalized when she's 16.
Yeah.
We used to do the whole thing like when we wanted a hug, we're like, oh, I'm sad. And then we stopped like, you know what? No, we don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I also don't, I don't do this with other people's kids, but like, oh, she's going to be a heartbreaker when she's older. Or, oh, she's going to be, beautiful when she grows up. Number one, that I think that's creepy.
I do too. I always hated that.
Like we're boiling down an existence to how someone looks, which is crazy. And Alexa's mom was really supportive growing up, and I think we would like to be this too. That when Alexa's mom in high school, periodically Alexa's mom would be like, "Hey, are you like? I want you to be honest with me. If you feel like you can, like, are you sexually active? Because if you are, we'll get you on birth control. I'll buy if you're not going to stop, like, I at least want to make sure you're safe."
And that's where I struggle. I'm glad somebody brought this up because I don't know. Because I think at the very end, I think we skipped over it at one point. Like, what does Scripture say about purity? Are we meant to live a life of purity? Circling back to what you're saying and tying it kind of into that, I struggle with that because there's a line for me personally, of enabling, and I don't know because that's a very hard line for me because I don't want Violet to ever think that like, hey, it's okay to have sex. Like, I don't want her to, you know what I mean? I hope that we parent in a way that she does want to wait till marriage. Because even though I had sex before marriage and, I can't look at, talking to Garrett really mainly here because you and I did, not with each other, just to my knowledge. You and I did, they didn't. So I can't look back at premarital sex and be like, you know what? There were some positives to that. I can see some benefits of having sex before marriage. I can't find it.
I don't think I said that.
No, you didn't. I'm just saying, like, I can't see that. So I hope that what I do for Violet growing up is be like, hey, I've been on that side of it before. There's not a positive thing to come out of this. And I hope that she wants to stay. But if she comes to me and is like, hey, Dad, I had sex. Okay. Give her space to talk about it before I speak. I do not want to speak first. I hope God gives me the grace and the patience to handle it right. Because right now I think of my 3-year-old daughter, I'm ready to go shoot somebody. But,
Dead.
Assuming it's high school age or something like that,
Yeah.
and it happens, I hope that me and Abby are able to respond in such a way that is like, hey, we love you. I don't agree. I did. I agree, and explain, hopefully have that conversation. Like, here's what happened to me and the scars I carried. And I hope that, we move on. But I struggle mentally thinking that I would want to be like, all right, you did, you're going to do it again. Let's get you on birth control. Here's some condoms, whatever. I just don't, but I get that too. I know people who've done that, and I just don't know.
And like my logic, our logic is, if she's doing something and she knows that, like, hey, we don't think that's wise, and she says, I know, but I'm choosing to anyway, then at that point, it's about safety. I want to keep her safe. I don't want her to get sick. I don't want her to be pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want any of these things. I want, like, safety is my concern at that point. And like you said, of course, I hope that, we can explain to her, like, what's wise and what's unwise and why. Because on the flip side, we can be like, this relationship that your mom and I have, this is the result of not doing.
Yep.
Like, if you want what we have, a good way to get there is by making wise decisions. And this is one of them. And so we can look at our relationship and be like, if this is what you want, like, let us give you some advice. And hopefully she takes that advice.
Yeah.
And so that's my goal with raising Ella is to be the example for her. And she'll have a bunch of good examples I've talked about before. My parents have been married for almost 40 years. Both sets of grandparents were married over 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And like, just be like, this is...
How long have you been married? A little 10 years?
10 years.
10 years.
Well, it's 11. I've been married 11 years.
You've been married 11. I've been married 10. How long have you been married? 6. Garrett? 5. So that in this generation, we've all, I think it's fair to say, gone through really hardships in our marriage. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. Garrett?
Yeah.
Garrett's like, no, man of God over here. I ain't got no
Still
hardships in my
honeymoon
marriage.
phase.
Yeah. 5 years. Yeah. That's true. You got to
No.
put some years in.
We got the two biggest things that can hurt a marriage going against us.
Homosexuality.
Yeah. Children and finances. So
Often I love how those are often linked too.
yeah.
Yeah, they do go hand in hand. All right, Garrett, youth pastor for you, plus I want two answers for this as we wind down. I want the dad answer first about being a parent and how you're going to handle this kind of thing. And then also I want the youth pastor answer with your kids and how you're going to handle this as you continue to go. You've been a youth pastor for a year now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as you continue to grow in this, as long as God has you in this season, how are you going to approach this kind of stuff as it becomes more relevant? So those two I want to answer from you. Like I'm Jeff Probst right now.
I think for the youth, I think it has to come from a point of like me just being bold to say those topics and to talk about those topics and not to tiptoe around those topics and everything. Making sure that they understand grace and that condemnation is not from the Lord and that God never points his finger at you and all those things. And that hopefully through the experiences that I've had with premarital sex and the stuff that comes along with it, that when I share with them the experiences that I've had and the negative connotations I've come from it, that they learn from it, man. And that's all I can hope for with them, is that they just take that seed and hopefully it'll produce fruit in their lives.
You don't want them actually to take the seed and produce fruit, though.
That's counterintuitive.
Yeah, that would not be good. Are you following? He's not following.
No, I'm doing my best not to follow you. This is a path I'm
He's
not going
actively
down.
going the other way.
Yeah, I'm holy and set apart.
He's pure.
Yeah,
And we established that at the beginning.
Pure.
I don't think of purity culture. I just think of purity.
pure. That's it, man.
Purist.
But going to my parenting style is going to be, well, I love all the answers that you guys said too, because you all pointed at it starts in the home.
Yeah.
And so just as like, as a youth pastor and other leaders in the church, like it all starts in the home so that you can minister to those in the church. And if you're not right in your home life, then you can minister all you want in the church, but eventually that stuff's going to come to light. All light, all darkness comes to light eventually. And so I think in the home with Leo and Lorelai, you know, right now with Leo, I'm starting to become more open with him about things. Not full on yet, but enough to where, you know, I can tell him I have some experiences on things that he like jokes around about and stuff.
Have you told him about TC yet?
You know, TC?
No,
Yeah, you just tell me off the pod.
Bowling Green? TC?
Off pod,
yeah, because it's not ringing a bell.
I just wanted to see his.
Anyways, but teaching these kids and my kids the importance of loving their mom at home, like, and what I've seen and what Leslie sees is people, and this, she says this all the time, is that people only love to the capacity that they've been shown love. And if they are shown love through sex, then they are only going to love through sex. And then as a parent, as a parent, you have to make sure that you're loving your kids in a way that's healthy and in a way that's from the Lord and not just, you know, flesh driven. And so I want my kids to know their identity. I know that's such a overused Christian saying, but
dude, I've
remains
had to
true.
reclaim identity because I used to think it was such a cliche thing.
Yeah.
But identity is such a key part of Christianity, life in general, but Christianity specifically.
Well, it's like one of those words like season and relationship that you hear literally you hear it 60 times every Sunday.
Circumcised.
Church is all about relationships and all. Anyways, but yeah, just showing my kids, man, we gotta love them.
I have. Oh,
no, go ahead.
I have a little anecdote from our young adult life group.
Okay.
Don't ask what the topic was, but something was brought up about sex, and this is a good.
Well, I'm immediately going to need to ask what the topic was.
I don't know, but young adults that's a group that can handle it. Okay?
Yeah.
So we're talking about it.
They be heaven.
And I said something about Alexa and
An
I.
example?
I don't know.
I said something about Alexa and I. And one of you guys know Zay, who lived with us for a little bit. He kind of made a face, you know, like, ew, because he calls us mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, ew, I don't want to think about that. And I asked him, I was like, would you rather that your mom and dad dislike each other? And his answer, as you know, as profound, it was profound. He said, well, you know, I wish that my real parents had sex and loved each other.
Yup.
And all of these things.
The truth hurts.
Yeah. And you could tell that like he wasn't expecting me to ask that. He was like, you know what, now that I think about it, he was like, you're right. Like, I am glad that you're open and honest with me about that. Because that is what I want. And so just like kind of having that example.
Yeah, it's definitely important. And I think a lot of, that's extremely true for way too many people. And like the fact that most of our, like all of our kind of ideas for all this kind of are rooted in relationship. Some of the things we didn't hit on in the beginning that I think has kind of revealed itself as we continue to talk is that purity was always meant for the sake of like relationship. This idea of purity. Instead, we made it about being set apart and isolation and loneliness. And, you know, I think when we try to talk about reclaiming this idea of purity, we find it in like community and in relationship, in vulnerability. And yeah, I'm just, you know, I'm thankful for, you know, knowing that a lot of us have dealt with the same stuff and we'll probably continue to deal with certain things, but know that we can talk about it and all that.
That's been one of the biggest learning curves for me is just being able to be open about certain things. Now, there is, because we've talked about it a couple episodes back, time and place.
Yeah.
You know, my dad always is afraid I'm going to overshare.
He has reason to believe that though.
Yeah.
Through experience, he's learned that you overshare sometimes.
Yes. But there is also a point of what I think older generations consider oversharing. I think we need to hear. Though I'm not talking about, foot gluttony or anything like that. Just I'm talking about like relational marriage kind of stuff.
There it is.
But and that's my closing thought.
Yeah,
is I think one of the worst effects that purity culture had on me was a now permanent fixture in my day-to-day life.
Okay.
Is where girls had to wear all their covered up bathing suits. Their feet were exposed. And that instilled in me a permanent, I'm not allowed to say the F word, foot attraction, foot fixation, or as Garrett adamantly, we're trying to rate this. He goes gluttony, foot gluttony, which I think makes it so much worse. I
said it, but okay.
Oh, JP said it.
Garrett was just like, let's just not say it at all.
Well,
Here we are.
happen.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and yet here we are.
Good thing is, Garrett, this would be easy to cut.
No, this is safe. This is hard PG. Everything else we've talked about has been PG-13, just in content alone. This is safe PG.
For you,
we could talk about sex, but we got to talk about positions.
We just did.
Did we?
Kinda.
I actually meant to say this about, like, I've also heard sermons and adjacent sermons about like controlling like what positions are holy and stuff between husband and wife.
Oh, that speaking in tongues during intercourse. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy stuff you can really get into.
And we're talking like the niche extreme versions of that. But like you did have pastors having whole sermons about like what's permissible between a man and a wife, which I think is crazy.
I had to tell my dad, I asked him one time what he thought about spiritual warfare and speaking in tongues during sex. My dad's been preaching. He celebrated 35 years at the same church the other day. And he got to chuckling on the phone. He goes, that's a first for me. I could just hear it in my dad. He's like, is this real? Unfortunately, yes. I just now discovered this as well. He's like, you? I was like, no, not me.
This is a conversation people are having, apparently.
Yeah, but dad's like,
words on the streets is.
My dad was like, I don't know. I'm going to get back to you. I can't think of any scriptural evidence to back that.
Can't prove it. Can't disprove it.
Yeah. So my dad's ever I don't want to say anything without researching it first, but he was pretty much like, no.
This is straight no.
The hardest question I ever asked my dad, this was a real conversation in a youth group to close here, because I wanted to tell youth group stories. We had a guest kid come to youth group one time. And it was when my dad was the interim youth pastor in between youth pastors, because all good pastors at some point have to do wear every hat at a church. So my dad's being the youth pastor, and one kid asked, one of my friends, of course, I'm sure Garrett wasn't there, but he asked him, he said, did Jesus ever get boners? And you would have thought that was the most sacrilegious question ever asked, but he was dead serious. Of course the answer is yes. And I've brought this up before, and as an adult, and I've had like older people get like vehemently angry at the question before.
Boners are the manifestation of sin in your life.
Yeah,
it's like God did not get a boner, but yeah,
holy cow,
what a weird life you've had,
dude.
Whole pod dedicated to Jonathan's life.
I could.
That's what this is.
I'm just kidding. It's bonus content,
boner content. The Patreon. Anyway, all right, to close here, Garrett.
For the fourth time.
Garrett, no, it's the first time I've said it.
We are landing the plane.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading?
Mm-hmm. Besides the Bible.
Well, that's all I'm reading right now, actually. I just finished practicing the way, so now I'm reading a book in the Bible.
I think we had this conversation off pod. You don't read the Bible and a book?
Well, I will to like
meditate
look
on
up
the word,
scriptures and stuff. And if I'm
meditating,
and if I'm teaching,
practically really made an impact in his life.
You really meditate, bro?
Yeah, no.
We already know contemplative prayer has ruined Garrett's life.
Contemplative.
No, I'm never saying contemplative. It's contemplative prayer for the rest of my life. I'm not going to say contemplative. Okay. Right, Garrett? Never contemplative?
Yep. Always contemplate.
Garrett. He can't not think about it now.
Yeah.
So the TC ruined Garrett.
All right.
Yeah. Anyway, Zach, what are you reading?
I am about finished. I'm going to update y'all this week, but I'm finishing my actual like transcription or write through of the book of Matthew. I have written it by hand.
Oh, nice. Wow. Okay.
as like my spiritual practice.
Like word for word or
Word for word.
reinterpretation?
Word for
Oh, I
word.
didn't know if we were like doing like a.
Bro, it's legit.
Yeah,
word.
like
No,
Zach's
I'm not that
interpreted.
educated.
Okay.
But writing it through as a spiritual practice. So yeah, it's
Nice.
taken me a long time to read Matthew, but
Mhm.
it's been a lot more like my spiritual or my scriptural recall from Matthew has gone through the roof
Oh.
Yeah.
by doing this. And
That's
I'm also
pretty cool.
I'm about done, and it's taking me a while because summer's the worst time for me to read. But that Paul and Gender
Mm.
study, that
Yeah, you've been
academic
on
study,
that one for a while.
which I highly recommend as I wind it down. So I've got like 50 pages left.
I thought that was the doorknob. I was like, all right, here we go. We're going to see violence on the pod.
And then I'm starting
Cool.
practicing the way is
What's
my
that?
plan.
About
Ice
time.
machine.
Oh,
Oh, practicing the way is amazing.
And some
Yeah.
fantasy books that I have.
First
to
of the
catch up
year,
on.
we're doing a practicing the way study, just so y'all know.
Okay.
Anyway, I am finishing up The Spirit of the Disciplines, Understanding How God Changes Lives by Dallas Willard. And I also am just now starting The Scandal of the Kingdom, How the Parables of Jesus Revolutionized Life with God by Dallas Willard. I am now 5 Willard books in. I only have 3 more left to go, which I haven't read them. And I can confidently say now, Dallas Willard is my favorite author. He's more insightful. Insightful, maybe the wrong word. I enjoy him more than C.S. Lewis. I enjoy him more than Tim Keller. I enjoy him more than Tozer. I enjoy him more than Piper. I enjoy him more than Eugene Peterson, which I love Eugene Peterson. And I enjoy him more than like A.W. Pink. Like, I love Dallas Willard.
Off pod, I have a couple books I'd love to recommend to you.
Oh, well, lay them on me. I'll add them to my Goodreads list. Now, I have been stuck in a reading rut the last 2 weeks because of the election. And
Just say Call of Duty.
Yeah,
well,
and
no, I
Call of
read
Duty.
during the day at work a lot of the time. But so my time the last couple of weeks has been keeping up with all the constant onslaught of news. And ever since post-election, it has been mind-numbingly busy because, and almost everybody cited Trump won. I could spend my money freely. Almost everyone. So I was like, which is good for me, but it's also way busier and it's only me ever at the store except on the weekend.
Also holiday season. So
Yeah.
Well, October, nobody's spending a cent.
He's saving up.
But anyway, yeah. So that's what I've been reading. So if you haven't read any Dallas Willard, I was talking to my dad about it the other day because he's almost finished with The Divine Conspiracy. I don't recommend it if you are a new believer. It's a little too just
It's
you would have
meaty,
no
meaty.
yeah, and it wouldn't benefit your life really. I think it would just be too. You don't want to end like The Divine Conspiracy is the top 3 books I've ever read. You don't need as a new Christian, you don't need a deep dive on the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. You know what I mean? What are you looking up, Garrett?
tweeting.
Oh my gosh. I'm over here. I thought you were like making notes about these books we're recommending. You're over here looking at memes.
He's just called you out, dude.
Freaking
Yeah.
edgelord over here.
Who amongst us has not looked at memes during this podcast whenever it hits over the 2-hour mark now?
yeah.
Hey, that's good. Last one was 2.5 hours
It's
long.
time to close. You've said close like
Well, this
4
is the
times.
closing.
So I'll just say,
Anyway, what are you reading?
I had been
You've been reading Tozer,
I have
haven't you?
read through Knowledge of the Holy probably 3 times now. Just because how it's broken down, it's just like little mini sermons each time, and you know it's very good for helping me kind of just really meditate on the word. So that has been that.
Which I
and I've
don't
been,
do.
What'd you say to me?
Nothing.
I've been
Just kidding.
also reading some fantasy stuff like
What?
that.
Like what?
Yeah.
Been trying to catch up on Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere series.
I'm,
Abby's
on-
reading Fourth Wing right now.
I'm reading Oathbringer.
Yeah,
I'm not super concerned about the Stormlight
Mhm.
because it's going to be so long before book 6 that I know I'll have plenty of. I probably have time for a reread
Yeah,
of all 5 books, but
So
the
those-
5th one comes out next month.
them some thick books.
Yeah,
So
The one I'm reading right now is 1,200 pages.
Dang.
And I also just bought
Oh, shoot.
book 3. I just bought book 3 of another series that like this is the completion of it.
mhm.
So I have the other 2 books now. I bought book 3. I just have to actually read it to complete the series.
Shocker, I'm not a reader. I just mainly do audiobooks. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
like
you know how I said like don't trust people that can't read.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are.
private school.
Well, I know this is once again kind of going back to women, that What Women Want episode.
Mm-hmm.
we're
Speaking about women.
we're four men.
Speaking of women,
We're four men talking about purity culture that obviously probably had harsher effects on women. However, it does affect men, and I'm not going to downplay that because it did obviously affect all of our lives. I do eventually want to circle back and have 2 women-led episodes.
Yeah.
One, I would like to have a marriage episode of the men. Then I like to have a marriage episode of the women. Then I like to have the women come on here and do a purity culture episode
Alexis
as well.
said she was up for it.
I know
So,
Abby is too.
She was very
So y'all
passionate.
just got to get Leslie and Caitlin on board to do it. And then
I think she'd be all right with it.
so I do want to do those in the future. Other than that, don't know what the next episode will be, but hopefully we won't go another month and a half, Garrett, without recording again. And
Why don't you meditate on
That's
that a little bit?
crazy.
so,
Yeah.
anyway, if you haven't already, thank you for all the subscribers out there. We're encroaching on 200, which is more than I ever thought we would ever have on YouTube. So thank you for subscribing. So go ahead and, oh yeah. Do you have hair on the top of your feet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wear socks too long and and it hurts.
What? No.
You ever wear socks too long and
Brooke's got a
the hair on
fro
top of
on
your
top of
feet
his
hurts?
foot.
Well, we already know he's got the click clack nails that
That's
when he
crazy.
walks. Anyway, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You come here for the feet content. I know you're still out there. So
You
thank
can
you for
cut
still
that,
being
JP.
here. Hopefully you've come to know Christ in the process. That would be the win. You can still struggle with, your gay foot fetish and come to know Christ, and we appreciate that, and we hope we're leading you to that.
What's the timestamp
I
on
can't
that,
say the F
JP?
word. Your foot gluttony. That's the better. Anyway,
This can be cut.
also, Spotify and Apple Podcasts are the main 2 places you can find us, but we're also everywhere podcasts are. So make sure to like and subscribe to Mostly Focused, and also go find me and JP over at Mostly Film, where we're still doing that too, and we are just laid out our 2025 roadmap. So very excited about that. We'll be back with you next time with whatever we're talking about. Let you know soon. Oh. And we do have some new stuff coming out soon too. I got sick and had to put it on the back burner, but me and Garrett are going to be doing weekly shorts here coming up soon. So that'll be exciting. And maybe Mostly Food is coming soon as well. So, all right. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.